looks like we're running. Let's get our light bulb on the 6th of April, 2026. All too exciting year of doom. And of course, beyond the analog, we have our TartucanWordPress.com, which is a whole website of stuff that you can download free to your heart's content. That's what it's there for. We are getting apace with our source-by-source run-through of the two Dwayne Gish creationist books, ancient books from the world of books, from 1978 and 1995, the revised version, to see how many sources he has, how much duplication he has from one volume to another, and to put the stuff that he's got in context. This is also a Luskin week, so we get four new papers are just reprising the same points that we were raising previously, but we will be put up links to most all of them so that you can follow along and exactly what we're looking at for keeping a scorecard of will the Discovery Institute ever manage to make their case on junk DNA based on this list? Highly unlikely. At any rate, we're still in Gish's opening chapter, which is the opening chapter for both of the books, on the philosophy of evolution and authority quoting people and playing around with stuff and casting doubts through authority quoting rather than discussing data, which he kind of implies he's dealing with in the rest of the book. But as we're going to be seeing, he's skirting a lot. It was the 1975 work by last I looked at the table of contents so that you see where this thing was coming from. This is a reminder that an awful lot of material is so old we will be seeing as we go into this episode. Old can be really irrelevant regarding the 1995 book, where things had moved on, and yet he's treating all of this stuff as if nothing had changed since 1978, or more appropriately, the 1960s, for a lot of this stuff. So, it was even a vague footnote to this book because we couldn't really tell what page numbers things are, what volume number it is. So, and Gish routinely doesn't list the titles of things. He's trying to be all sciencey, where in a lot of journals they will just list the main name, the date, an et al. If necessary, and the volume number and page numbers, and so and the journal that it's in. Abbreviated. So that's not at all uncommon in scientific literature. From my point of view, I need to see the title and more information on the subject, because if he's just nipping a thing from one page, is it from a letter to the editor? Is it a piece? Is it an actual technical paper? You will necessarily know that from the generic structure of that footnoting technique. That's another little trick that is going to be using. I'm listing all of my stuff as I'm accessing all of this stuff with all of that full information. And you will note in our books, we have the whole Megillah of the full, well, in some cases we have to truncate to et al. To keep the number of lines short, because there's an awful lot of sources in the book. But we have a, oh, hi Vesta, see you on the show. Main title is important, if only so that if anybody wants to check up on the material in our two books, you can always go by the title of the article, independent of the journal structure, some of which, of course, can be tricky if, say, the journal is in the meantime, or, as is occasionally the case, their archives don't go back far enough so that you can't locate the material. Sometimes you'll have a thing where the archive starts in like 1990. And that means all the decades of stuff that they had done before existed in hard copy, but it's not available for inspection electronically. Now, we may or may not be encountering that stuff as we go along. Anyway, the next little quote that he's dealing with, an authority quote from 1960 by Everett Olson, for Darwin's centennial volume, 1960. That was a jackpot because thanks to archive.org, bless their little hearts, all 3 volumes of this thing are available section, and one of the volumes, the commentary piece, hi Brian, the commentary piece where everybody's doing back and forth on all of this stuff, that one's downloadable completely. It's not even a matter of having to borrow it. It's on the one hand, when I'm looking at a book in here, Everett Olson is a page, Gaylord Simpson is involved in it. There's an awful lot of people involved. Trust me, bro is not enough as a citation. To be fair, Gish does not do that trust me, bro part. He is a detail fiddler. And in fact, the same technique you see with Jonathan Wells, the late Jonathan, and more relentlessly with Casey Luskin at the Discovery Institute. If there's anybody who is what I call a fiddler, who they really want to festoon their material with a lot of technical citations and maybe hoping that you're not going to check out to whether or not they're playing fast and loose with the data field, that's the Gish approach, and Casey Luskin falls into that category as well. We will be alluding to many of these little episodes, fresh items, including Gunter Beckley in Volume 2 of The Rocks Were There. In fact, some interesting things come up with Luskin regarding whale evolution and Jonathan Wells, where I had the whole whale chapter from his 2017 zombie science book available to be able to burrow through to see the tricks and maneuvers he was doing. And dear old John Woodmaratt, bless his sweet little heart, he was pulling the same trick that he was trying with the reptile-mammal transition. Recommended, get Evolution Slam down into that in gruesome detail. But the same trick of where he's plowing through cladistic studies and trying to find supposed reversals, he's doing the same trick with whales, and did a later one with birds. But once you know how the trick is done, it's relatively easy to spot, and easy to spot if you get the primary source material that the guy's riffing off of, because the shell game won't work if you can get the original source material and see what the actual data field is, which quite relentlessly Woodmaratt is not in the habit of explaining. Well, Gish is in a little different category. I've always been amazed at how so a Trojan source adjacent. Yes, indeed, it's just as a guesstimate. I would say that of the sources that pop up in anti-evolution literature, other than authority quoting, where it's like 50-50, between 50-50 chance that quote will be exactly as they indicated. Of typical errors or even editing things down, not quite as common, because they want the creationist, dedicated one, really wants to put it in their own words, as Henry Morris liked to put it. But the Trojan sourcing aspect, which is that marvelous term that Dapper Dino makes use of, where you cite a source, and when you look at the source, you find it doesn't say what they claim it does. That's a relatively small percentage, but pivotal percentage. Maybe 10, 15, and in some cases up to 20%, depending upon the person doing it. But here it's where the more, oh gosh, this is good to be true. Wow, here's the evolutionist blowing their arguments to smithereens. The creationist caught it. The odds are much higher that it's a Trojan source. Find the original material. And this kind of trickery, as Gish was able to do back in the old days, if I had tried to do background researching for Gish's book back when it came out, and I only acquired a copy of it years after the fact. I can't remember whether he gave me a copy of it or I had bought it on a used bookstore or somewhere. Anyway, I acquired a copy of it eventually. I know I'd go and order Dwayne Gish's 95 book because I really wanted to have that little puppy. And it's been a really useful enterprise because Gish represents the high watermark creationist detail fiddling in that period. They've had to move to a lot of other topics, and there's a certain crossover between intelligent design and young Earth creationism, depending upon the topic. But it's in some respects trickier and harder for a modern creationist to pull off these kinds of tricks because the information is so available, and the range of stuff, if you delve into it in any great detail, which is why people like Gutsick Gibson, Gutsick Gibbon, Dapper Dino, over in the religion context, all people are doing source methods, Danster and Cardinale. It's like a, ooh, you put a source up? Yay, let's see that little material. And the fact that the vast majority of the sources for the Luskin list have been able to get at source directly has been enormously valuable. Anyway, this 1963 volume work was well received at the time. In fact, I'm going to be putting a link up to the first page of the Science review of it, so you can get kind of a sense about it. It was clearly regarded as a serious work, and it was ultimately dealing with things that would become, to some extent, irrelevant in the decades to come. And it was about, you have the morphology of the material you had in certain instances, and whoops, I'm getting a lost connection. Nope, clock's still running. Okay. And the biological genetic data. Wind the clock back 1960, because that's when DNA was like a really new thing. They literally didn't know yet about the codons that actually code for the DNA. That wasn't worked out until the mid-1960s. And of course, it's way down the road that you're starting to discover homeobox genes and retrotransposons and a whole bunch of things like that that are starting to filter into the literature, particularly in the 80s and 90s. Well, that time frame is before Gish 1895 book. So what we have is a delicious window between that 1978 material that is very book text driven, occasional technical papers, but relatively small. I've only encountered so far for that. And no internet material, websites. In the old days, what creationists were going after, things like magazine, Scientific American, all of that opened up a whole world by National Geographic website, and you would have news media websites and so forth and so on. Up connection is bouncing in and out. Let me see who we got. Yeah. Outlines problems there, Richard. Oh yeah, that's one that an come up for a highlight. Waiting for our signal. This phrase up here. It's saying we got an error. You go. Quoting the abstract, which outlines the problem they are researching as if the focus of the research paper. This is a thing that Dan Stern Cardinale is really keen to call attention to as an error amongst superficial creationists, is that they can't seem to read past the abstract. And certainly you can get some information, and in a lot of papers, there will be information that is summarized in the abstract that will be really relevant points. But the meat of the thing comes in the discussion conclusion section, as well as methods, which are relevant for the technical scientist. And if you're only with the abstract of the paper, by definition, you're missing that. And I would say that in my own research, that the creation issue, I did 3/4 of the time, the most meaty little bits of information that are relevant and pertinent to the point up aren't in the abstract. They're far down the road in the actual details when they're going into that. And so a creationist is just addicted to that abstract, or worse, and that I suspect goes on as ends up in the Discovery Institute junk DNA list, just trawling for, oh, they're talking about argument without that's, which is everything one step at a time. Anyway, went to 1960. we've got the situation where big chunks of our modern understanding of DNA and genetics and epigenetic and methylation processes and all of this stuff that's going on in the nuts and bolts of things was unknown to them. So a paleontologist looking at the morphology of a fossil record that had way less things involved, they had a lot, way less than what we have in the 1990s on, and then trying to make sense of that when all they have is the Neo-Darwinian synthesis level of mathematically based genetics, which reminded me of a recent lecture that Zach Hancock put up on his show. And so I'm going to be putting the link up to that because it's a doozy. You will want to watch Zach's piece on this because it is breathtaking. And in every single instance when Zach does one of these things, I'm just like a kid in a candy store because he has such a familiarity with the background history of things that I'm adding sources like mad into the data field that I didn't have originally. And he explains the context of it all. And it boils down to the fact that Neo-Darwinian synthesis driven has a legit pedigree that Zach goes into in a great deal. It goes all the way back even to a more controversial character, Francis Galton, who is Darwin's cousin, who came up with an awful lot of this approach. And the funky part is that biomes and genomes that behave in a way that can be apprehended in mathematical analysis that can be reduced to extremely simple and reliable formulas doesn't depend on the nuts and bolts of what's going on inside the DNA. Ultimately, it is the result of what's going on in the DNA, but those mathematical relationships stay in place without you knowing what's going on at that level, even though sometimes it can be relevant to figuring out the evolutionary processes and specific. If you envision a cell as a seething cauldron, as stuff of activity, as stuff is literally. I think John Perry and his new to the fact that the cellular stuff, when they're showing these little things to see how in a model, they have to slow because things are happening really fast, and I am not sure. Okay. First degree in the APA formatting standard helped me when I was writing research papers. Yeah. I have a little tweak in the way that I construct my reference bibliographies. Anybody that looks in the bibliography for rocks were there or evolution slam dunk will note that I'm a little quirky. I'm not following anybody's standard format. And the point is that there's multiple different. See, that footnoting that would be taking place in a Nature paper is a different way that the citation would be going in the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences and so forth. Whereas for me, I want to have one in my master bibliography, a full list of all the authors, no et als at that level. I may reduce it to an et al when we're doing a reference for a book, but just to save space. But in my master reference bibliography, I put the whole wad in there. And in some cases, some of these genetic papers can run on for a page. There's a huge number of scientists that can be involved. But that means that if I'm looking for a particular author, I can find them in the master reference bibliography because they're going to be showing up even if they're like the 57th author down in the paper. Then also the full title. I want the date up in front. I want and the date of the issue have full dates as to like the 14th of January. Others are just volume 3, whatever is their procedure. And then full page numbers so that I have a complete framework of locating the material. And that anybody that follows along, plus I have a peculiarity as to how I put like a little comma and then an and mark for the last author. And then I have everybody bolded, which means if anybody copies any reference that I do, because my system is a little peculiar, I would be able to spot that they nicked it from the book. Other little thing that I spot creationism, because there's different footnoting systems, or for that matter, other writers may reference an article from Science Magazine slightly differently. They would put the volume number, or they would put the date number, or they would put the full title. If you find somebody citing material and they're inconsistent footnoting, that's a dead giveaway that they may be siphoning their material secondarily, because they're just copying meticulously every character. That's how Kent Hovind works. Kent Hovind copies stuff exactly as it is in the material he's typing from. And therefore, if there's a typographical error or an eccentricity of it, he won't be able to spot it, because all he's is copying down the information that he's getting from the other material. Luther Sunderland's book and Scott Hughes popped up in the same way. I alluded to it, I think, on my website, but also I think I mentioned it in, it could be in the 3 Mac Revolutionary episodes, and I may have alluded to it in Evolution Slam Dunk, but that the bit that Scott Hughes, a parasitical superficial creationist, his book came out in the mid-90s, lifted material from a large bit of it from Luther Sunderland, complete with references to things he never discusses in his own book. He's just trying to pad things out. And the reason I could find that this was the case is because in some instances, he was copying things so precisely that he even copied the typographical errors and spelling mistakes that Sunderland had made in his book. Or Sutherland. I'm always getting Sutherland and Sunderland mixed up. But the guy that the creationist that went around with a microphone all the time. And it's a very glib, silly book. And there's a bunch of creationists that follow exactly in that same format today. And to some extent, we would look at that Project Veritas crowd running around trying to get gotcha things on abortion clinics and Somali day centers. Same methodology as Luther Sunderland. Blah, blah. So anyway, trying to get my trail back onto the thought of this 1960 book. It's one that I've not gone through all of the material on, and I may never actually go through the whole thing. Although as an cottage enterprise, it might be kind of fun to move through and see who was discussing what when, just to get a vibe of what was going on back in 1960. But such of that stuff for verbatim in the 95 book with no additions is quite revealing, because 95 and 1978 are planets when it comes to what the available material was. It's completely different realm in terms of homeobox genes and all this stuff. Who cares what a paleontologist was saying in 1960 about issues where it's the 1995 biology and paleontology that matters. And that's an issue that Gish was always behind the curve on. And in fact, anybody that plays that kind of game is behind the curve on. Casey Luskin in the whale chapter falls into that same trap, where he doesn't seem to know that the fossils have moved on. So he's thinking of a chronology for whales where he's got pachycetids at a date when he doesn't know that there's already some that are 3 million years earlier. So the numbers, but map of time has never been one of Casey Luskin's strong suits, and is unlikely to ever become one, because that's a diagnostic feature of creationists. So anyway, I will want to watch that absolutely fabulous Zach Hancock piece. Follow up on sources that he brings up and the papers and all that, because it's really indicating about potential paradigm that is still valid in our era of Evo Devo, which is to be able to recognize that there's both a very detailed genetic level, the point mutation superstructure of the active cell and all of this churning things that's going on, at the same time that the end product of all that activity at the organism level and population biology level is into things that can be described by simple mathematical formulas independent of the details. In the same way that you don't need to have a catalog of every air molecule in the room to be able to feel the wind on your face and know that it's going to follow Bernoulli's law, and that if you didn't put a doorstop on the door, it could suck the door shut in a stiff wind, which has happened to people that have actual doors of that type. So Gish also is trying to pit Olson or suck Olson into their bit that he briefly mentions. Gish briefly mentions the 1966 WISTAR conference that creationists just love to hype. And I'm not going to be going into a hell of a lot of detail on that. In Roxford there too, we go full course on that. Not only the WISTAR conference, but the Altenberg 16 and all of these various controversies, supposedly, where engine designers lately have been big purveyors. Steve Meyer and the other, they just go ballistic over this stuff. And when you actually dive into what was actually being discussed, including at the WISTAR conference, no, you just had a few squeaky wheel people who were raising issues that are redundant anyway when you look at it from the 21st century point of view, because moved on, these issues don't matter anymore. In the same way, when Luskin tries to pull out Haldane's dilemma to go after the mutation issue about how whales and that developed, and Richard Sternberg and all this, there's just so much fun stuff that hopefully that this chapter will be another benchmark in collating all of this stuff, not only to get a clear sense about whale evolution and the biology and genetics of it and fossils, but also the just head up their ass dumbness and annoying intransigence of creationists on this point, including intelligent designers, or the practical cricket sound, the reasons to believe bunch. It's very, very interesting to see. And there's a big chunk of it, too, we'll be alluding to kind of after the fact, because a large, a dozen or more websites have brought up various creationism issues are gone from the internet. Poof. Even some of my own work, Talk Reason, disappeared. And some of these things may no longer be accessible. An awful lot of Chuck Misler's website stuff and Canograph stuff is not necessarily accessible publicly as it used to be. So hard copy, sometimes things disappear from the internet, and it's nice to have all of that. I'm still getting more blurb lost connections. Ding, 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 ding. Okay, so let me, since I blathered almost half an hour, let me thank our dear patrons who have been so helpful to us as we all hang on for dear life. Who knows what the hell is going to happen? Come. Here we go. Let me get my window shared here. And remind everybody that keep your powder. I appreciate any money that comes to me monthly, but as I know and various other people who depend on these things point out, always look after your own finances first. And it's a matter where you have to triage and say, well, can't help Downard this time. Such is life. If you can jump in on the bandwagon and join the parade and support the project, I am delighted to see you do so, and will be permanently grateful. But that's just life. We live in busy and exciting times, especially where getting rid of all of that window. And so on to the Luskin list. Luskin stuff is, we got 4 papers this time from 2016. And one is about non-coding RNA being involved with polymerase transcription. That's Codron-Herger et al. There were no really claims about ALUs, which is the main section where all of this stuff is coming in, except that the RNA that they were studying did appear to be enriched in them. The next paper, Wang from 2016, Wang et al. There I will only be able to get the partial info to you. I was able to acquire the full paper from other places, but there wasn't anything open access that I could put a link to. So I put the Science Direct version, which is a very extended abstract. So you'll be able to see a lot of stuff on it. And it's very similar to the Codron-Herger paper. Studying experimentally ALUs can interact, and in about a dozen cases, they're well aware of the fact that there's like 1 million of them out there. And so if you just do the math in your head, you realize that none of this is undermining the point that Danster and Cardinale made, that these retrotransposons are fabulously abundant, and therefore a tiny proportion of them can actually do something. They can blunder into becoming a functional thing for good or ill, without it meaning that the majority of them are. And that's when we enter the other issue about the ill part, because the other two papers slam into Theodicy issues again. There's a paper from Gu et al. 2016 that we'll be putting the full text up on, which explicitly said, quote, transposable elements, TEs, have no longer been totally considered as junk DNA for quite a time since the continual discoveries of their multifunctional roles in eukaryote genomes. As one of the most important and abundant TEs that's still active in human genome, ALU, a subfamily, has demonstrated its indispensable regulatory functions at sequential level, but its spatial roles are still unclear. So 10 years ago, they're just laying out the parameters, but the paper was delving into all of that. And they naturally considered the obvious fact that ALU's affinities, particularly being prone to methylation, could be doing things elsewhere, but absolutely no numbers or percentage are offered. However, along the way, they note the TEs are often highly methylated since most transposable events are deleterious, and the host genome must try to suppress the activation of TEs. And that cites a work not included on the Luskin list, Yoder et al. From 1997, that I will be putting a link up to. Are you getting the impression that the Luskin list leaves out the parts that might be conflicting with their little paradigm? We've noticed that before in issues where if they are bumping into areas that are clearly becoming more of a problem, even though occasionally they're citing papers that actually are a problem directly, the Trojan source issue. But they often bypass stuff. And that's where following the citation trail within these papers to see what's being left out, or if the creationist is citing a technical paper. This is, I may have mentioned before, I'll mention it again, the Dracula rule that I use. Dracula in the novel can't enter your house unless invited in. But once he has been invited in, then whoop, unless you wallpaper the place with garlic and crucifixes, you're stuck, and he can come in anytime he wants. Well, that's the scholarly rule. If you do not cite paper X, you can be accused of not paying attention to it and being ignorant of it, but you can't be held accountable for the content. But if you do cite paper X, even if you were clumsy and only paid attention to the abstract, or worse, never got within a mile of the paper and simply nicked it secondarily from some other source, you are legitimately held accountable for all of its content. In theory, you should have been able to know all of this stuff, unless you're explicitly saying that you haven't looked at the paper and you're just getting it from somewhere else. And I've never seen creationists go. The closest you get, Hank Hanegraaff is fond of doing this sort of stuff where they'll cite a paper that he's clearly got from Dwayne Gish and put an appendage in to it, says also cited by Dwayne Gish. Buckaroo, that's where you got it from. Don't give me that half-ass. So anyway, the other paper that's also a Theodicy one, it's Kim et al. 2016, and it's on ALU distributions. And it's investigating hundreds of thousands of intergenic sequences, which is, remember, still only a tiny fraction of all that total, and explicitly noting how those ALUs, quote, were primarily amplified 35 to 55 million years ago, whereas the active ALU-Y subfamily was primarily amplified 5 to 10 million years ago, unquote. Which means there's a whole chronology that is embedded in that paper that no intelligent designer has ever bothered a whit about. There's no sense in which they ever think, well, what was being designed then and what happened after that? And the reason why we've got this is because we're primates, you know? Isn't that the implication of the piece? And are you disputing that? In which case, what do you think you're making out of all of this? Oh, Jack Ruby and DJ, yes, yes. That's well. There's information distortion and suppression is one of the critical elements of the Tortugan mindset, and it doesn't matter whether they're a flat earther or a young Earth creationist or somebody trying to keep the Epstein files or the Trump files, as Jimmy Kimmel has trademarked. Them. It's all the same bad method. They often have different objects of what they're dealing with. And often it will be the case that if somebody has a sloppy method that's prone to do this, they're probably going to be doing it in a lot of stuff. And blowhard, deadbeat Alex Jones and other of these people are just appalling in their practice of blowhard blustering and grift and graft and not owning up to their mistakes and not correcting themselves because they're just in it for their own ego and money, a lot of money. So the only time that these things are going to be dampened down in our society is for them not to make money at it. And so the degree to which maybe going through the Trump depression, if that should transpire, could be a maw of hard knocks that may crimp an awful lot of people's ambitions, especially some of these young people who have been living in a depression-free post-war world, and they don't realize that might change. And especially if they've been putting a lot of their money into crypto, Donald Trump's crypto in particular. Well, we'll see about that. Anyway, the Kim paper went on to conclude that these ALUs are connected some to disease, and that, quote, the depletion of ALU elements in long non-coding RNAs and messenger RNAs suggests that most exonized ALU elements arising in the population are deleterious to RNA function or stability. Let me repeat that. Most exonized ALU elements. This begs the question that most ALU elements aren't getting exonized. They're still junk DNA. But of those that are, most of them are producing a problem. Does Casey Luskin really want this to be designed? Is this not creepy? But to be fair, having bumped into Luskin to see how and his scholarship, he is the most prolific of the people at the intelligent design camp. In my own data field, roughly 14-15% of all the intelligent design literature is just Casey Luskin. He is vomitously busy over there. Not informative, except as to his method, because you can see all the material underlying all of that. Anyway, that will be the material that we've got for all of that. Once the thing finalizes, I'll be able to put the links up either later on today or whenever I can get around to it. It's busy times working on all that. Got to get income tax out of the way, sent off the car license that came in. I got to do property tax at the end of the month. This is a busy time financially. April is a pile of crap. But anyway, that's the way it goes. Yes, both the crypto and AI bubbles are getting sewn to mighty thin films. Yeah, and both of them have another feature in common. They are colossal energy hogs. And so it's going to be an interesting thing, especially with some of these big data centers built out in the middle of nowhere, which seem to be a boon to the economy, maybe, at least in the initial construction phase. And then they're just this monstrous energy maw that is causing your local energy bills to go up, because that cost of all of that stuff is being passed on and amortized around the much larger number of people that are living out there. So in some of these places out in the middle of nowhere, what happens if you get to the point of where things get dicey? Winters are bad, summers are terrible. So where you've got too much air conditioning or too much heating needed, and it's now a choice between pulling the plug and freezing to death individuals in their homes versus pulling the plug on the data maw that allows idiots to make AI images of Donald Trump flying a fighter plane into Godzilla or something. Going to be an interesting little thing to happen on that front. And a thing to be watching out for, from my point of view, since NVIDIA and their AI construction stuff is so dominant in the spending. I've heard numbers as high as like 40% of the air quotes manufacturing investment stuff is just AI and just a small number of companies. And if they fail to meet their growth factors, because what the hell are we using this stuff for? Is it good for anything other than maybe putting some people out of work and doing useless things, and maybe on the sly around the periphery, some actually useful stuff? That NVIDIA, if they fail to meet their growth things, that could be a trigger for a crash. You've also got the possibility. Crypto tends to, it looks like crypto kind of is the tail after the dog elemental in the economy. It looks like they kind of slide along. Gold goes up and they go down and vice versa. And there's some minor details on that. So in many respects, they may not be nearly as influential as they like to think they are. But anyway, then you've got the unregulated shadow banking market that it's functionally the counterpart of the kind of loan juggling that was being done before the housing market crashed back in 2008. So there's a third element that's going on, and that's independent of people belt tightening because of the Trump inflationary policies and people trying to keep their health insurance as the well, we can't afford that, but we can afford $1.5 trillion defense budget so that we can drop bombs in Iran. I think Mr. Trump can kiss his Nobel Peace Prize prospects behind on that one. Anyway, so we've got a lot of potential things. I suppose the one semi-bright side is that there are enough decentralized elements and safety net things still in place that the economy hasn't crashed yet. And if we can muddle through without a depression, that would be just swell. But I'm really worried that there's too many of these little factors, especially after Doge and Project 2025, and the Trumpistas are hacking their way through a lot of these things and trying to put pressure on stuff. Plus, tens of thousands of businesses and consumers in the millions who really have to kind of put their decisions on hold because they don't know, they can't plan for the future because crazy train, I love chaos Donald Trump is making it impossible for people to make intelligent decisions because they don't know what's going to be the case 6 months or a year from now. And all of those squeaky wheels could theoretically all squeak at the same time, and we get into a mess. One good Carrington event, and all that goes to loss. Yes, exactly. So we are in very interesting little times, and we're maybe not yet out of 1929 yet. So let me put our little advert up for Rocks Were There. And I'm assuming that eventually Peter will be doing a cute little volume 2 advert that we will be able to show once we get our second book done. Come on, baby. Get our little things queued up here. I'm not, as I have pointed out before, not fond of the little scroll pad thing that operates in, I like mouse. I like mouse, but wireless mouse died on the thing, so we go back to the scroll pad. Such is life. But compared to what people are experiencing in Somalia and Sudan and Ukraine and Gaza and Iran and lots of other places, the mere failure of a wireless mouse is a first world problem that I will not complain about further. So, get my little mug back there. Come on, baby. There we go. Not that it's all that photogenic, but I do with what I can. Everybody stay super duper safe from ice, climatological, and or thuggery. And all the different circumstances. Keep mindful out of the fact that the Trump administration is going to do everything they can to steal the 2026 election, to downplay voting in certain swing states because they are desperate to hold control of the House. And maybe even the Senate is in play, although the jury is still out on that one. My motto would be, yes, by mice in pairs, never hurts to have that spare sitting as. That's not a bad idea. And if I have more money available, I would certainly do that. But we make do with what we can under the circumstances. At any rate, it'll be interesting to see. Well, we have an easy peasy, simple organization. I can tell you that any attempt to try to interfere with our state here in that matter, try taking my mail-in ballot from my cold dead hands. The only difficulty being, of course, that you've got the potential dilly-dallying at the post office level where they're talking about maybe it's not that big of a deal if they can't get the thing delivered in time. Well, once the thing gets delivered to me, which is sent out well in advance of the election. I don't have to do all because we vote in. You can either mail it in, or I never do that. I drop it at the mailbox, at the little drop box up there at the library. So I get a little bit of exercise, schlep up to Shadle Park, and drop it in the box, and there my voting is done, and no trouble. And I'm independent of the post office. I recommend all states do likewise. And if any of these idiot states don't like the idea of having nice, convenient drop boxes, use the same method where our fill in little bloop blop things, and we keep the physical records of the ballots. So anybody that wants to check them and make sure there's been no errors involved can do so. Blah blah blah. The hanging Chad knocking approach is clumsy compared to the way that we do in our state. And I don't know the circumstances in Utah or some of these other places that are have heavy uses of mail-in voting, but if they're doing the same method as we do, then there would be no difficulties. So even delivers the junk mail late. Yeah. The there's such amount of reforms and improvements that need to be done if we can get past the Trumpistas and get some really full-out progressive reforms going, which we have been lax on for a long time. Holy smokes. There are so many serious reforms that need to be done, and we've done little piecemeal little things, but everybody, including people in the Democratic Party, have either been too timorous or they don't have the votes in their camp. I mean, I'm sure Elizabeth Warren and Ocasio-Cortez could go gangbusters on an awful lot of really serious reforms, but do they have the votes to go along with them? Which means it's up to us, the voters, to get people with some gumption in there. And my motto would be, if they have enabled the Trump administration and have an R next to their name, they are Trumpistas and need to go. And especially every single senator that voted for the complete cabinet of the Trump, including Hegseth, where the deciding vote was Vice President Vance, by the way. Yipes, this shit show of a cabinet. Only a handful, Rubio mainly, is an ideologue, and I'm not impressed with him for a lot of reasons, but he has, by comparison, a functioning brainstem compared to the Hegseths and Kash Patel and these other right-wing ideologue media personality numbskulls. And of course, the extent to which their incompetence means they can't really carry out some of the stupid rules that Trump wants to have in, or if they do, they get run afoul of the courts in other directions, and then they have to get fired. And so we've already ousted Noam, and out goes Bondi. Who's going to be next on the ejection parade? Because the God King Emperor must never be wrong, and he will demand that there will be sycophants who will do his bidding, regardless of what the Constitution is. And once the dust is settled, if Trump has managed to build his golden ballroom and his mess, I want it all demolished. It's all got to go. Nothing of that should be surviving. So anyway, everybody stay super duper safe. Watch out for any circumstances of things. We got kind of a nice, comfortable temperature in here, going up into the 60s and high 50s and that for a while, which is comfortable on the heating bill. Other areas of the country may be more annoying, and certainly we have places around the world with military activities going on, and because Trump is crazy as a bedbug now, we don't know what the hell is going to be happening. So watch out. I would look forward to B. Patel. That is not at all implausible. That's it's sort of an interesting parlor game. Who is the least qualified in the Trump administration? It's a stiff competition, isn't it? So anyway, everybody stay safe, and we will see you here. Hopefully the laser-wielding penguins will not be running amok in the meantime, and we will be seeing you next week. Ending the stream.